Hello, my name is Daniel, and you're listening to Engineering Success, episode 59. How you guys doing? I hope you guys are doing all right today. I am doing wonderful. It is Easter as I'm recording the intro to the podcast. I had a wonderful Easter. He is risen. He is risen indeed. We had a great time. Maddie and baby E dressed up in matching outfits. It was super cute. It was fun. And we're making friends here in Charlotte. So for those of you that have been praying or hoping for us to make friends, thank you so much for those thoughts in our direction. We're finally developing a sense of community here in Charlotte, which is nice. Well, that's our little life update. Let's get an update on our top tier supporters of the podcast. I want to give a huge shout out to John Ott and Leroy Jenkins for their support of the podcast. You too can be a top tier supporter of the podcast for $10 a month. Link in the description box down below via Spotify for podcasters. $10 a month gets you to shout out at the beginning of every single episode of the podcast, and it really helps me out. It helps me maintain my website, www.engineeringsuccess.com, where you can see all things engineering success, from episodes to articles to links to different topics that we've discussed on the show. You also can email me at daniel@engineeringsuccess.com if you want to be on the podcast, or if you'd like to ask a question that I could respond to in a mailbag episode of the podcast, which I'm planning on my next episode being a mailbag episode. But yeah, thank you guys so much for your support of the podcast. It's turned into, I actually have a sponsor that I'm working on. I'm hoping that the next episode of the podcast will be sponsored, which is pretty cool. And yeah, life here is really good. Baseball season started. The Masters is around the corner. The Rangers are doing good. The Mavs are on a win streak. All of my aspects of life are kind of going really well right now, so I am pleased. Anyways, that's the update. That's the intro. Let's get into the interview. My guest on today's podcast is an accomplished executive leader. Elizabeth Hoemeke graduated from the Georgia Institute of Technology, or Georgia Tech, with her Bachelor's of Science in Civil Engineering. She started her career in the energy industry, working as an environmental engineer for Atlanta Gas and Light. And then she pivoted to information technology, where she grew into executive leadership. Her career encompasses senior leadership roles in the fintech, payments, and banking industries, with payments being her niche, culminating to her current role as the Chief Information Officer, or CIO, at OneInc, the fastest growing digital payments platform in the insurance industry. Today, I am so excited to host Elizabeth on the Engineering Success podcast to talk about her engineering journey, her career evolution, and the exciting things that she's doing now in her current role. Elizabeth, how are you doing today?
I'm doing terrific. How are you?
I am great. It's Friday here in Charlotte, North Carolina. Yeah. It means that I have a short week this week. I came off of my spring break, and it's been a nice kind of short week getting back into it. How's your week been?
It's intense as always, but good, productive.
Good.
Looking forward to having a little bit of a break over the weekend.
What is your day-to-day like as a CIO?
Oh my goodness, meetings. Unfortunately, we find we're very oversubscribed, and so we end up spending a lot of time, early in the morning and in the evenings, kind of trying to catch up on other work, but just really working cross-functionally with the whole organization, spending a lot of time with my leaders on all of our technical roadmaps and all the work that we have in front of us, and just trying to keep everybody motivated, pulling in the same direction, and informed about everything that we have going on.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate you taking a little bit of time out of your busy schedule to talk with us today. I want to know about your journey in engineering and how you kind of got started in engineering in the first place. Did you always know that you wanted to be an engineer? How did you discover that for yourself?
Well, I think from the time I was young, I liked construction. I liked building things, and I liked watching my grandfather build things, and I liked watching my dad. I think my dad has admitted to me that he regrets not including me in some of those kind of construction projects because I ended up being pretty good at them. But it was always, I learn a lot through observing and hands-on. So it was sort of a natural fit for me and my personality, I guess. So going to Georgia Tech was never in question. That's where my father and my uncle went, and that's where my mom ended up going a little bit later on round 2 of college. And so I didn't even apply to any other schools.
And for you, you ended up choosing civil engineering. Was it because of that construction experience that you knew, or were there any other inspirations that you had whenever you chose civil engineering?
Well, I actually chose chemical engineering first.
Okay.
And my first class was organic chemistry.
Oh, no.
And I think I made a 36 on the first test and dropped Chem-E and switched to civil before I even finished the first quarter. So short-lived Chem-E education, but civil was really a good fit for me because so much of civil engineering is so practical. And I actually do use a lot of those skills just sort of in my just day-to-day life managing, home and projects.
That makes sense. Elizabeth, I can totally relate, by the way, with you not wanting to do chemical engineering, because I didn't know until midway through my sophomore year, what type of engineering I wanted to study. But one thing I did know right away was that it was definitely not going to be chemical engineering.
Yeah, it's when I was in high school, I thought I was so smart, and then I got to Georgia Tech and realized I was average. That was kind of a shock. But that first test score really that scared me off, to be honest.
That makes sense. You kind of got one of the questions I like to ask people is they go from being a really good student in high school and then they get to college and they're kind of average. It sounds like that was kind of your experience.
Yeah, it was challenging. Georgia Tech, I used to say up until this role, that nothing in life has ever been as hard as Georgia Tech. And the students all say they didn't graduate, they got out, like it was a prison sentence. It was a lot of work. I worked really hard. I didn't have the fun, going to parties all the time and going to the pub and getting a fake ID. I didn't get to do any of that because school was intense. The thing that I learned the most out of Georgia Tech is learning how to learn, how to study, how to analyze, how to be really critical about how I approached things. And so my grades, the first, I think I made Dean's List the first 2 quarters, and then I had a little bit of a rough spot and then figured it out in my civil engineering career courses at the end, and ended up, my grades came back up. So I just barely missed Dean's List, which was so disappointing, but I got over it pretty quick. So, I studied hard, I worked hard, learned a lot, and just happy to have gotten out.
I relate to that so much. I don't think I ever made the Dean's List. I graduated with the same honors as a bunch of people that did. So, and then you get your career and you're like, okay, nobody really cares that much. But I'm so glad that it's what you learn and what you take from it that really matters the most. What was your experience being a woman in engineering? Were there a lot of women in your classes?
There were 2 women in my civil engineering classes, and sometimes I was one of the 2. Sometimes there were 3 of us. It was pretty lonely. There weren't a lot of women, but I was also then got to be pretty popular because there weren't that many of us in school. And Georgia Tech was known back when I went there as there was a big weed out. A lot of people didn't make it after the first year, and they actually used to joke in orientation, look to the left and the right of you. One of you is not going to be there. Well, I think probably it's more like 2 of you will not be there. So anyway, it was hard. Not a lot of women in those classes, but I was in a sorority, and that is where I got all of my girl time. So we tended to flock together and got to spend a lot of time. So even if in my classes I didn't have a lot of women, I had a lot of women friends and that I'm still friends with to this day.
Makes sense. Would you say that it's pretty attainable to do Greek life in a Pan-Hellenic sorority and also do engineering? I've heard a lot of people say that it's not attainable, but it sounds like it was for you.
Well, I think it depends on the school. I know my son, when he went to college, that first semester was a big bust because the fraternity commitments were so intense, being a pledge. For us at Georgia Tech, it was, they knew we had to study. So we had study hall, and we had older sisters, and we had Word. And if you don't know what that means, it's copies of old tests and homework that you can check out and use to help you study. And so there was a big emphasis. I think with all Pan-Hellenic chapters of sororities and fraternities in any organization, even non-Panhellenic, everybody has to make grades. And that was important to us. But I mean, we knew, it was a tough school, so we had to make time, and it wasn't, we weren't overly committed. So it was no problem to balance it.
Makes sense. Well, thanks for sharing that experience. That's a unique one. I wasn't in a Panhellenic. We didn't have any national fraternities or sororities at my university. But when I tell people that I did that, they're like, no, there's no way that you were able to do that and all the other things. But I'm glad that it's your experience too, that you can have that experience. And I'm glad you had that experience. Were you involved in any other clubs, or did you have any internships while you were in college?
I didn't intern. I always worked in the summers, but honestly, I was a lifeguard and taught swimming lessons to little kids, so which I loved. And, when I was in school, there wasn't this intense pressure to have internships in your field. I actually think I would have probably loved it had that been the norm. It would have been a lot of fun to have worked for like a construction company as an intern, or maybe not. I don't know. But yeah, just wasn't that wasn't a thing back then. That's something that has evolved, more recently, with kids having so much pressure on them to find those internships in their field of practice. But it was, I got to just, I had an easy job. Just had to be a lifeguard.
Well, I wouldn't say that's an easy job. I never had strong enough swimming skills to be able to do that. And you obviously say that again?
I said, I could teach you.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Maybe I'll need that. We have a 9-month-old, and we've looked into those classes, where you take your baby and you throw them into the pool. And really? Okay.
Do it when they're really young, when they're not afraid, and then they don't learn any bad habits that somebody has to break later.
Okay. Yeah. Well, I guess we'll take it more seriously now. We were afraid that it would maybe just like petrify her of water for the rest of her life. But it's pretty cool what those kids do, where they, they're fully clothed, and then you push them in the pool and they flip on their back.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I didn't teach that way. I taught more traditional, but I did like it when I got the little ones, because they just were just so unafraid. They're just fearless, and everything is fun. Blowing bubbles, going underwater. It's just not a big deal to them.
Yeah. Oh, that's so fun. Well, it's been fun talking about your college experience, and we talked about your college job, but let's talk about your first job and your career journey. So you graduated and you started your career at AGL, Atlanta Gas Light. So how did you get your first job?
My best friend applied and was accepted. She was an engineer also. And so then I applied, and I got a flush letter because I had written back when you actually wrote, letters, cover letters and resumes, and you mailed them on nice paper, back in the old days. I had taken all of my civil engineering electives were all in environmental. Environmental engineering wasn't a full degree back then. It was more kind of like just a set of extra classes that you could take. And I loved the environmental work. And so I had positioned my engineering competency heavy on the environmental, looking for a role in engineering where I could use that environmental training. And they didn't have an environmental department. So they didn't even know what I was talking about. And so I got flushed. So I rewrote it. I made it sound more basic engineering, more civil, and got an interview and got accepted and was hired. And that was that. I don't even think I interviewed at any other company. So similar to college, only applied one place, applied at the gas company, got it, Again, there wasn't all this pressure to have multiple offers. We just were so grateful to be out of school and to be getting having an opportunity to work, get out of the house, and get that first paycheck, which was $623 a week, I will tell you. I still remember that paycheck to this day. Seems like not that much now, given what kids are making out of college at this point. But yeah, it was a hot minute ago.
Yeah. So you were there for 7 years, though, and you actually, if I looked at your resume, it does say that at one point in time you were an environmental engineering engineer for AGL. So how did you carve that niche while you were there?
So once I got hired, they started to, I started talking to Larry Bradbury, who was my first manager, and we were, what they didn't realize, they were sitting on top of environmental projects. So when we started to talk about the work and the situation, we realized that there really did need to be a really strong focus on environmental. And so because that was where I'd taken a lot of my electives, I was, I kind of volunteered to start that group. And then Larry became the head of environmental engineering, and it ended up becoming quite a significant department. As you can imagine, just like in, a lot of manufacturing, there were very bad behaviors, decades ago, a lot of dumping, a lot of improper storage. And so the gas company was, not immune to that. So we had a lot of really interesting environmental projects, whether it was asbestos coatings on tanks, contaminated oil, holders full of, sort of gas contaminated rainwater. There was a lot of work to do, and it was scary and very rewarding at the same time.
Yeah. And it's one of those cool things, right, where you studied to do something, you tried to do something, and then you found a spot in your career where you're actually doing the thing that you envisioned, at least from the beginning of your career. This is what I want to do. But at the same time, obviously, your career has gone in a completely different direction. So what was going on there? What was going on in the back of your head that kind of was leading you to leave AGL?
Well, I made a little bit of a transition while I was at the gas company from kind of what I would call hardcore engineering to kind of IT, more of the computer science type area. That was also really starting to gain some traction. And as I did my environmental work with all of our local gas company offices, I found that I had a little bit of a knack for recognizing problems and things that they were doing manually and figuring out how to use sort of the new emerging PC technology to solve those problems. And so one of the first things that I did for one of the offices was they used to have these forms that they would put into a typewriter, if any of the listeners even know what a typewriter is, and they would manually type all that stuff. This was pre-word processors, pre-laptops and cell phones where you can do all that stuff, at the palm of your hand. And so I created a form to where they could do it on a computer. And I actually spec'd out the first computer for our first couple of offices. And so I just really started to kind of get into that sort of business requirements, finding a technology solution to solve a problem or to make something easier to do or more automated, and applied for a role in the technology team that was, again, sort of just getting started, and became a business analyst while I was there, and then used that as a springboard to continue my career in technology.
So that kind of brings us to your transition away from AGL then. So after AGL, then you went and started a career with Equifax. How did that come to play?
My tennis partner.
No way.
Yeah, I played mixed doubles, and Lee Grice and I had been chatting about what I did and his job, my job, families, all that sort of thing. And he said, he goes, "Would you be interested in coming to work for us? Because we're looking for somebody with your skill set." And I'm like, sure. I was still commuting from way outside the perimeter. I'm in Atlanta, so that's a thing. Into downtown to go to work at the gas company, and just like every city, traffic's horrible. And the Equifax office was literally like 3 miles from my house. So I was like, win, win, win. I get to, work for another company, get to do what I love, and I get to be close to home. So I went to work for Equifax and had a very amazing career there for many, many years.
Yeah, and that was you came in as a director, I assume, right, when you went to Equifax, and then you pivoted your way maneuvered your way all the way up to becoming a vice president level employee at Equifax. What was that growth like for you in your career?
It was a lot of fun. I think when you're good at something and you love doing it, you kind of get pulled from project to project and team to team. And so I had some really incredible opportunities to develop some first of the kind web applications for the organization. And again, just kind of kept moving up and moving into getting pulled into new projects and kind of more greenfield spaces. And so I got a big opportunity to lead teams, develop some new capabilities and some new platforms, and just, had a great time. I loved working, and I had some terrific mentors and managers while I was there that I learned an incredible amount from, that I still use every day to this day.
Yeah. And you were there for 14 years. And I think one of the things I've observed from your career is that you can have a really good experience at a place. It could be very formative for your career development. You have great mentors there, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you need to stay there. And you didn't stay at Equifax. After 14 years there, you left to go to First Data Corporation. Why'd you make that jump?
When I went to work for Equifax, I thought, I'll be here 5 years. But because I got involved in so many cool new projects, it stayed exciting. And then, like a lot of us, I won't say women, but I'll say us, you get to a point where you hit kind of it wasn't even a glass ceiling. It was kind of a glass box. I couldn't really go up and I couldn't go out. I couldn't, because if I took on something new or something else, it was taking it away from another person. And so I felt really kind of boxed in, and I was called by a recruiter, a headhunter. First Data had just moved their headquarters from Colorado to Atlanta, and they were looking to rebuild the organization. And so I took a big chance and went from a company of about 2,000 people to a company of 26,000 people. And that was a good opportunity for me to basically go work for some place where I pretty much knew almost everybody that, was tangentially connected to engineering and software development. And then to go to such a large corporation with so many different divisions, it was kind of a rude awakening in one respect, but also, exciting to have an opportunity to go and, try my hand at another financial services company, and really started to focus on payments.
And that you set me up really well for a question about your niche, but just for my audience, some of you guys may not be familiar with First Data Corporation, but I did a little bit of research, and I believe that First is responsible for the STAR network, STAR network, that some people will see on the back of their debit cards. So I bank with Fidelity, for example, and it says that my debit card is in the STAR network, and I can get my fees reimbursed if I use a STAR ATM. So that's a cool anecdote for those of you guys listening. That's what First Data Corporation, one of the many things I assume that they do. But so Elizabeth, you mentioned that you're trying your hand at another thing in the payments industry. At this point, were you realizing this might kind of become your niche, or was it like, okay, this is just another thing that I have experience related to this?
I think one thing that's, and people may disagree with this, but, engineering and, software development it's pretty consistent. You need to have a certain amount of industry knowledge, but the things that make you really successful in software development, it's almost industry agnostic in a way. As long as you've got really strong, good product management partners that kind of help you flush out kind of what do we need to do, what problems do we need to solve, writing the code, testing it, writing business requirements, those processes are pretty consistent. And so I don't know that I didn't set out saying, I want to go into payments. It was just a really interesting opportunity to go work for a much bigger company and stay in the technology sector. So the industry itself wasn't really what attracted me, but once I got there, one of the things that made me happy was that when you're in payments, you are helping a lot of, in that role, a lot of businesses, sell their merchandise, their services, their things to other people. And you're kind of powering the economy. 55% of the world's credit card transactions flowed through the First Data networks. And, that's worldwide. So that's kind of a big deal, to be, work for a giant that was really making a big difference in in just e-commerce. And so that was fun. When I was at Equifax, one of the things that was a little bit less fun was the fact that, people's credit reports are good, and sometimes they're terrible, especially when you're the victim of fraud and your credit gets ruined, and or you can't buy something because your credit score isn't high enough. So there was a little bit of sort of just negative energy around that aspect of it. And so going to work for a company where I really felt like we were doing things that were helping the economy and small businesses in particular, also more so when I went to work for Elavon. But I thought that was kind of a fun, interesting aspect to feel like a really big contributor to the economy.
Ah, that's cool. And you got to contribute in a big way there. I see that you were the VP of their portal technology group, and then you also were their chief of staff for their global technology and product solutions group. How was that experience for you working in that chief of staff capacity?
I think that's a really great role to have a lot of influence on where we are investing and how we are resourcing. It's a function that is kind of goes across all the different kind of project groups and the development groups. It also probably is very similar to like a portfolio management type role, but with a heavy finance component to it. One of my best managers or leaders that I had at Equifax put a huge emphasis on that technology people really needed to understand how budgets work, budgeting, forecasting, CapEx, OpEx, and all of that training and knowledge that we gained from him is something that's just been really valuable. And it's been a sort of a special skill that I've been able to bring to the table, for every company that I've worked for. So I highly recommend, no matter what role you're in, understand the money, because then you can use that knowledge to your advantage to stretch your own budget or to figure out how to sell new projects and, figure out what the ROI is to make sure that you get funding to do some cool stuff.
That's cool. That's great advice. I've gotten similar advice: is try to get as close to the money as you can. That's one piece of advice I've always gotten in my career. So you were there at First Data for 2 years, and then you mentioned Elavon. That was your next stop. How'd that transition happen for you?
I was recruited away because they always say it's who you know. A woman that I had worked for at Equifax became the chief product officer at Elavon, and she told the CIO that he needed to hire me. And so they did. And that was another just fantastic career move for me. I had an absolute blast for that entire period. Yeah. Built a great organization and got to do some terrific projects.
That's cool. So what does Elavon do for the folks in my group that audience who don't know who Elavon is?
Yeah, they're a subsidiary of U.S. Bank, and their name is, you might see it on a credit card machine, for when because it's a payments company, and that's what they do. They're a merchant acquirer, and they process payments, and they're owned by U.S. Bank. And which is why I have that little bit of my career at U.S. Bank. It's actually part of all the same company. I just moved out of the Elavon business line and into a larger bank group. But yeah, it was a blast.
Yeah, and this is still IT strategy for this part of your career. You're focused on the IT part of the business, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So at Elavon, I call it the bookends. So there were 3 or 4 development leaders over the actual software engineers. And I had the business analysts, which later became the product owners as we made a big shift from waterfall to agile. And then I had all of the QA resources. And we made a big pivot from manual testing to automated testing. And so I say I had the bookends, the developers were in the middle, and I was sandwiching them on both sides. And so I ran those 2 groups for the whole Elavon business line, and then also got to do a lot of neat things around innovation.
Actually, you mentioned something there that was really cool. You said you were involved whenever you pivoted from waterfall to agile, which I think was happening across the industry probably around that same time. It was probably a consistent shift. What was that like, and how did y'all make that decision to make that pivot?
Well, we had been evolving our waterfall sort of practice. And I would tell anybody at the time, we had the best waterfall shop I'd ever seen. I mean, it ran like just an absolute top. And we got to the point to where the business was starting to change their minds a little bit more frequently, and we needed to be able to adapt. And in a waterfall methodology, you do so much work up front. And then if you change your mind, all of that work is lost. And so it made a lot of sense to switch to the Agile methodology because it allowed us to embrace change a lot faster and be more responsive. And also, I think our organization as a whole just was really desperate to learn something new. And, waterfall is just viewed so negatively if you're in a fintech kind of company. And so we had one group that had already been developed from scratch. It was called the Grove, and it was a product development team, and they were already agile. And then the entire rest of the organization, which is more of the kind of mainframe, kind of, I don't want to say legacy because these systems are all in operation today. We're like, well, we want to be agile too. And so we just said, well, let's do it. And we started the program, and, we started in engineering really, but reached into product and our compliance teams and brought everybody on that journey. And it was bumpy, like at every company, but we persevered. We had some great people helping us. We brought in some consultants from the outside that were our agile coaches that helped us kind of get our minds right about that transformation. It was such a great experience that we kind of did it again at my current company. They were probably hybrid water or agile, mostly agile, but really needed to take it to the next level. And so we've been working on that for the last year too.
Makes sense. So yeah, you mentioned your current company. And so you were at Elavon for 9 years. You had a quick stop at US Bank, and then you came to OneInc. How'd you get to OneInc? And then we'll talk a little bit more about what you're doing now.
Yeah. So once again, it's who you know. And when I was at Elavon, I had worked with Ian Drysdale. I was the technology member on the North America leadership team, and he was head of sales. And so we'd kind of gotten to know each other there. And when he came to OneInc, when he first left Elavon, we'd gone to lunch because he wanted to tell me he was leaving. And I said, well, if you ever need a CIO, keep me in mind. And he's like, oh, really? And I'm like, oh, of course. And he went off and did a tour at a company in Florida, and then came to OneInc. And so he called me one day and said, we're looking for a CIO. Do you want to talk to us? And I'm like, absolutely. I won't tell you what I really said because it's a little bit of a bad word, but I'm like, yes.
I have a feeling I've heard that word on a golf course somewhere.
Yeah. So, but anyway, yeah, interviewed and was fortunate enough to be hired on by the company. And we've been here for almost 3 years. And it's one of those things, be careful what you wish for. It's my first role as a CIO, and it's a tough job. It really is.
That's so fun. So let's talk a little bit about what your day-to-day is as the CIO. We talked a little bit about how your week is, but what are the big initiatives that you've gotten to push in the last few years with OneInc?
Oh gosh, one that was a total blast and that we did so well, it was probably one of the most technically difficult engineering projects that I've been a part of, was a move of a product that we acquired from AWS to Azure. And I have an amazing team of engineers here. And one of my top guys, Alexi, led that project. And I participated in the 3 weekends that we were doing big cutovers. Mm-hmm. And the night that we went live and moved all of our production from one cloud to the other, we were on the phone for 21 hours straight. And it was incredible. I mean, I haven't had that much fun since, doing something for work. I mean, it was just awesome. Just everybody, solving problems, watching things, database data, files moving, servers being redeployed. I mean, it was just amazing. We spent 18 months planning that. And we had a partner that Microsoft funded for us, with some investment that they made in our company because we're growing so fast and we were moving everything to Azure. And we just, we worked together all night long. And, once everything was up and running and things looked good, we were like, all right, let's call it a wrap. And we looked at our watches and it had been 21 hours we'd been awake. It was,
Wow.
sounds ridiculous, but it was awesome. It was it's just a huge win for the organization. And we got so many benefits out of consolidating, cost optimization. We can now use common tools. We have people that have so much experience with Azure that we're able to leverage across the product that we acquired. And it was a fun project. And then probably we're always doing big things for the company, dealing with customer requests, adding new features, partnering with our product organization and sales on all of that. We've been working on just really kind of building out a really integrated product offering to the market. So we are a payments company for the insurance industry, mostly property and casualty, but we do a little bit of medical too. And we have an inbound product and an outbound product. And so the outbound product is the one that we acquired. And so we've been working for the last probably 2 years to really get those products integrated, rebuild components that, maybe needed a little bit more shoring up, or that we wanted to be able to scale a little more effectively, and adding some new capabilities along the way. So that's an ongoing project. That's probably going to take us another year. We're leveraging everything that we're building as we build it. So it's not a big bang initiative. So that's been a lot of fun. And then, like I mentioned earlier, we kind of helped the organization transition from sort of separate product teams building software to an enterprise-wide organization really embracing all of the principles of Agile and doing it at scale. We're not a huge company, but we're growing really fast and we're going to continue to grow. And so it was very important to me to get a scaled Agile framework in place that would grow with us or would support us as we grew. And of course, just like everything that's Agile, we see what's working and what's not. We make adjustments and we continuously improve all the time.
Yeah, that's really cool. Thanks for sharing those big projects and kind of letting us peek behind the curtain on what you're pushing and what OneInc does. What kind of people, engineers, I have a lot of college students that are in my audience. What kind of, I guess, young engineers would be good fits for coming and working for you guys?
Well, I think security is always going to be a great field. We have our security engineers are incredible partners of ours from a software development engineering perspective. So security is fantastic. We have pretty broad cross-section of programming languages that we leverage and database technologies. And from what I understand, because I'm not an actual software developer, my engineering is a different ilk. But, I think people are really adaptable at learning new programming languages and new technologies. And one of the things that I've come to learn about my engineering teams is they like to learn new things. So having an opportunity to learn a new database technology or a new programming language is interesting, and new architectural patterns, getting those things implemented. You build a lot of software, you buy software and integrate with it. It's all, like I said, it's kind of, that's very industry agnostic. But those are the things that, those are the skills that we look for. But I think probably the most underrated skill is curiosity, is constantly getting curious and saying, I'm going to figure out how that works, or I'm going to go read that code, or I'm going to go learn some new, you read something or hear about something and you actually go dig in and research it, or I'm interested in Azure Cloud Native capabilities. Well, let's go figure out what those are and how could we leverage those and how would that help accelerate maybe some feature development. I think the people that are the most curious and that are continuous learners, that's a skill set that is hard to pick out in an interview, especially for somebody right out of school, because you haven't had a lot of maybe time to experiment and learn outside of the classroom. But I think those are really good skills too. And I'll take somebody that wants to learn over somebody that has a 4.0.
Another big way that people demonstrate that ability to learn is the other things that they pick up on their resume. So are there certain things you look for in resumes for young engineers?
We have tended to hire a lot of more senior engineers, trying to bring in people with experience from other companies. we are getting ready to start. We've had an internship program for the last few years that is really starting to gain some traction. So I think what we're looking for, or what I'm looking for, is people that are good communicators. They enjoy collaborating with others, so they like being part of a team. I do also really like the people that are so brilliant and they're best at being a really strong individual contributor. Those are, you got to have both. So I think, having a balance in if I'm looking at like a college resume is, did they work during the summer? Are they working while they're in school to pay part of their way? That to me demonstrates an ability to, prioritize their time and multitask, and a commitment to their own education, and also just, an ability to do kind of more than one thing at once. So, just smart, enthusiastic, continuous learner, curious. Those are kind of the characteristics that I tend to look for. And then I let my engineers ask all the hard questions about how do they write code and comment code and, engineer, testing people's software knowledge. I let them do that. And I kind of try to look at them from a personality perspective and say, do you bring something new to the table, some life experiences or some aspect of your culture, your upbringing to the table that would be beneficial, because it's been well researched that the most diverse teams are the most successful and the most creative. So I also look for, I don't want to hire a bunch of people like me. I want to hire people that are not. And I think the more diverse your teams can be, the stronger and the better they'll be.
I agree wholeheartedly with that. That's one thing we hit on pretty hard on my last interview with Melissa Drake. There's a big thing that she hit on. She's super involved with SHIP, which is like the Society of Hispanic Professional Engineers, and those organizations like that are just phenomenal. SWE, another great one. So I encourage students that listen to get involved with the organizations that support the groups that they identify with and are part of.
Yeah, I agree. And I think networking in general is something that there should be a class in college or in high school about networking. Again, it is who you know, and leveraging the network of, and for the young folks that are listening, your parents' networks. Don't hesitate to talk to your parents' friends. They know people, and they can help, because it's not that they're going to get you the job, but they might get your resume pulled to the top of the pile. They'll maybe open a door for you and create an opportunity, but then it's up to you to sell yourself, and then you got to do the work. But I think networking is just incredibly important, because it helps you, build a bigger community of people and resources that can be helpful to you, that you can be helpful to as well. And also, it's just great to have a lot of people in your corner if you ever are looking for your next opportunity.
Yeah, anybody knows somebody. Exactly. You mentioned earlier that you're not in the technical weeds with a lot of the things that you do, and you rely on a lot of other people for that. And whenever you're interviewing people, I see that most of your career has been in roles that I define as what's the word that you use? Individual contributor, hardcore engineer. Yeah. Yeah. So how has your engineering background served you, though, in those capacities outside of hardcore engineering?
Well, I mean, I think civil engineering is interesting because it's construction. It's your building. And I mean, this sounds I'm oversimplifying it, but you have a blueprint, you have requirements, you construct, you build the software, you have, inspectors come and check your building, make sure everything's to code. You've got QA that's testing the software. So it's just such a natural flow of what I like to do, which is to build things. It's just that now we build digital assets instead of physical assets. So I think it's a lot of fun. It's a great career.
Yeah. And you've worked with a lot of engineering teams, but whenever it comes to your peers in executive leadership, have many of them also been engineers like yourself, or what kind of academic backgrounds have they had?
When I think about the leadership team that I'm on now, I don't believe any of them were former engineers, I'm talking about the leadership team that I'm on, so my peer group, of course, my leadership team that reports to me, I think with only, 7 out of 9 are hands-on software development engineers. They all are. So we have a strong engineering culture at our company, and most of our leaders are actually doing the work in addition to leading their teams.
That's cool. And then I guess we're kind of culminating to this final question here. You've had a really cool career journey, and you've gone through a lot of different executive leadership roles. You've gone through a bunch of different organizations in your niche. Are there any big takeaways you have for yourself? I know we've mentioned one of them is it's about who you know, but are there any other big takeaways that you have on your career, reflections or big pieces of advice that other young engineers should keep in mind when starting their career out?
Oh, gosh. I think one of the most important things when you're starting your career is who you work for. And I've made a couple of errors in my history of working for the wrong person. And if you work for the right person that is going to invest in you and support you and give you opportunities, that's when your career flourishes. And that's when you as a human being are the happiest. And happy people do the best work. That's just, almost silly to say out loud, but if you're happy, you're going to do great work. And if you like the person you work for and you like the team you're on and they're supportive, then you're going to flourish. And if you are working for somebody that is sort of a violation of your core principles, or that is putting you down, or, just has leadership characteristics that are just not, they don't work for you, get that resume up to date and start looking for another opportunity, because life is short, and you want to put yourself in a position to where you're going to be surrounded by people who are advocates for you, and you advocate for yourself, of course. But, if you make a bad decision going to work for a company or a person, just, chalk it up to experience, learn from it, and move on. And I would say the same thing, that if you ever find yourself in a position where upward mobility or lateral mobility and your ability to continue to learn and take on new responsibilities becomes difficult, don't be afraid to change companies. I don't recommend changing every 6 months, but I've had very long stints at companies, and then I've had some shorter ones. And there's reasons why those were shorter.
That's a phenomenal bit of advice, Elizabeth. I really appreciate you sharing that today. I think it's very relevant. I've seen a lot of my peers struggle at their jobs and be in a situation where they don't have the right leadership structure, but there's other things that are keeping them. And then after a year, then they're like, oh, wow, if I had just listened to my gut a year ago, I would be in a much better place now. So I think that's a really good piece of advice, especially for somebody young in their career. So thank you so much for sharing it. And Elizabeth, thank you so much for the time today. It's been a very cool experience getting to listen to you talk about your career journey and what you've learned along the way, and hearing what you do at OneInc. Anything else you want to share before we go?
No, I've enjoyed it. It's wonderful to meet you. I hope there's some little pearls of wisdom that I can share with your listeners, and I really do. I think networking is just so important, and I hope everybody goes and finds a group in their community to get involved and get engaged in. And they usually always have a philanthropic component as well, so you get to meet people that could help you in your career along the way, and you get to do some good for the community at the same time. So.
Awesome. Well, thank you. Well, I hope you guys enjoyed the interview as much as I enjoyed recording it. I really enjoyed my conversation with Elizabeth. If you want to support the podcast, please do consider becoming a top tier supporter or sharing the podcast with somebody you like or somebody that you don't like. Either way, I'll take it. You might see it as a form of help, and you might see it as a form of torture, but I hope you see it as a form of help for somebody else. I really appreciate your support in the form of 5-star reviews. If you want to leave me a 5-star review, I'll make sure to read it at the beginning of the next episode of the podcast. And yeah, thank you so much for your support of the Engineering Success Podcast. I will catch you in the next one. Thanks.
I'm not complaining, my thoughts get complicated, I cannot explain in layman's. Never losing focus because I ain't chasing payments. Still playing in the basement while I'm working on arrangements. They heard the kid in 50 countries, thank God that's amazing. But I'd rather thank Spotify, they put me on the station.